So now we come to Genesis 11, the last narrative before Abraham comes on the scene. That's why Genesis 1 through 11 is considered to be the Jewish prehistory texts. All the things of note that the author wants to convey to the Jewish people. Now keep in mind that Genesis, the entire book, is called Genesis, the beginnings, because it explains the origins of all people leading up to the Jewish people and how the Jewish people came to be in Egypt and spent 400 years in slavery there. That's why that grouping, the book has always been that way, is because it is a beginning to the people where they are right now. Another one of the many reasons why we would consider Moses to be its author. Now, it is important to recognize that there is one author for these texts because there are a lot of really curious phrases in specifically the Tower of Babel story that won't be explained unless you realize that the language ties together. For instance, in Genesis 11:4, it says, "Then they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth.'" This is important for a great many reasons. This one phrase by the people that have brought themselves together in this place communicates to us three very important things. The first two take us back. They take us back to Genesis 1 and Genesis 7. See, it says, "Lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." This is the first mandate that God gives mankind. It says, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it." So right away, the hearers of this story recognize that language from Genesis 1, and they say, oh, these people are in rebellion of God. They are already trying to disobey. And then we realize that in their disobedience, recognizing the power of God and what has come before, they seek to build a tower that has its top in the heavens. Now, there's been a lot of debate about what that means, and I think needlessly so. Because if we recognize that this comes from one author, then we realize that just as "lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth" comes from an earlier part of Genesis, so does this language about the top in the heavens. Because if we look back to Genesis 7 with the Noah narrative, we realize that God had the rainwaters fill to the heavens. And so what it is these people in willingly rebellious nature before God are seeking to avoid his judgment by building a tower that goes above the heavens. It's not this, we want to go to outer space. It's not this, we want to climb into heaven and join God. It's a very real disobedience with an effort to avoid punishment for the disobedience. These are the two distinct facts that we get from this that comes before. Now, the next one, in this sentence, "let us make a name for ourselves," calls forward to Genesis 12, where God tells Abraham that God will make Abraham's name great among the nations. That's a promise that God is doing. So rather than the people making a name for themselves, God will make a name for someone as long as they obey his covenant. This is an entire rebellion. And so we see that the people are utterly impotent in their goal of avoiding judgment. Because it says ultimately the Lord dispersed them from over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. They couldn't complete it. Therefore, its name was called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there, the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. So this is repeated, the face of all the earth, the face of all the earth, because it is God working, even in the midst of their rebellion, to fulfill his own mandate, tying back to Genesis 1 again and again and again. And it's interesting because at this point, Babel, or Babel-On, it's the same Hebrew word, is from now on always considered the great enemy of the mission of God. So when the Jewish people later go into exile in Babylon, it is seen as the great defeat, and the people in Israel are really in crisis, not knowing what that means. And so you see again in the book of Revelation, Babylon rears its ugly head again, because from this story, Babylon represents the great rebellion against God.